PyromaniacMo coming at you. We are sitting down today for another fantastic interview. As always, you can catch the boys at Pyromaniac. They're giving the weekly podcasts. You can check us out online, Pyromaniac.com. I know everyone's very excited for the Pyro Pro, which will be coming at you soon, and even our draft kit, which will be coming out in just a couple weeks. So stay tuned for that. As always with the draft kit, we're going to constantly update it. I know it's far, far too early to really be putting it out there, but we're just crazy like that. So if you do buy the draft kit, you're going to get automatic updates as it goes. All right. So you can follow me, PyromaniacMo, PYROMANIACMO, on Twitter. And today I'm sitting down with the fantasy footballers who were recently in a tweet as one of the better fantasy podcasts out there. So, boys, how are you? Welcome.
Hello. How's it going?
How can fantasy football fans find you? Twitter, podcast, website? What do you guys have going for you?
Yeah, so you can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you search for the Fantasy Footballers, or if you search for Fantasy Football, you'll find us. We're growing on there. You can find us on Twitter at the FF Ballers. We also have a website, thefantasyfootballers.com, that you can find us on. Those are probably the main ways that we're communicating with listeners right now. So we like to answer questions. If people want to email us, we'll answer them on the show. That type of thing.
And we're at 2 times a week right now for the podcast.
Hardcore.
Yeah. There's no.
2 times a week in April. That's
yeah,
right.
you're saying your draft kit's too early. I disagree. I think you're right.
I like it. I love it. Keeping up the fantasy goo in the off season. So for those of us who have not had the pleasure, what can we experience at your podcast? What separates you from the rest of the guys doing fantasy work out there?
So to me, the big 3 important things for a podcast are, number 1 is knowledge, number 2 is the audio quality of the show, and number 3 is do they understand that you're selling entertainment. We're not just giving you information. If it's just information but not in an entertaining fashion, no one's going to want to listen to it. And I think we hit all 3 of those, and we're very proud of the product that we're putting out right now.
Excellent. I had a chance to listen to you guys, and I was very impressed. I really enjoyed it. I think a lot of our Pyromaniac fans would enjoy it as well. At Pyro, we're always trying to peel back the curtain. We're dropping the knowledge on our listeners, but also we're trying to let them know some resources that we go to ourselves that they might be able to use. Give me one resource that you guys use either preseason or during the season that you find invaluable.
We're huge users of fantasypros.com, and what they are is they congregate all the expert opinions, and then they average them out for every position, for every scoring format you want. So it's just a really quick, easy way to get rankings. But not just so you get the big guys, ESPN, the CBS. You also get a little bit smaller guys like 4 for 4. We're hoping to get in there this year, and it's a great snapshot instead of having to go to everyone's site and individually research what they have up. It's all right there. It's an excellent tool.
Yeah, I would say also in terms of just researching those things, Pro Football Focus is a great resource to get beneath the surface of those top-level statistics and kind of project players. So we use that a lot in show prep and things like that.
And I would say Twitter. Twitter's in season. You just get news first. If you're tracking and following the right people, you're first to pick someone up off the waivers, and someone sends you breaking news that's 7 hours old.
Yeah, not really breaking anymore.
Yeah, I second all those. We just had one of our guys do a write-up for Fantasy Pros and Fantasy Pro Football Focus. They do a fantastic job as well. The elusiveness ratings and getting down to that, sub-level statistic. So I second all of those suggestions. Another thing we're trying to do is sort of metacognitively, think about the season. There's that saying that repeating the same action with expecting different results is a definition of insanity. So I'm trying to look back on this past season, see what I did wrong. What can I do better? Like, I think I took probably too many rookies. I fell in love with too many rookies. I just had too many on my teams. So that's one thing I'm changing. What's one thing that you would change in your draft prep for the 2015 season?
For me, I think this coming year I'm going to start streaming my quarterback. I've always liked the idea, but I've seen too many fantasy championships won by a streaming quarterback to stop doing that. So last year, I was pretty high on Aaron Rodgers, which was successful, but I think that you're better off, taking a running back, wide receiver early and streaming your quarterback. So I'm going to be trying that out this year pretty heavily in my leagues.
For me, the year went quite well. I beat these clowns, and I guess it's sort of related to what you're talking about. But I will say this: don't tinker with your roster when you're on vacation and slightly sleep deprived. I made a horrific mistake on a Monday night of thinking I'm going to set my lineup for the future week. However, the Monday night game had not occurred, and I pulled the guy out of my roster, and it sent me in a downward spiral.
That's part of being a dad and a fantasy football player.
So, but because of that, I missed the playoffs in that league because of that just moronic mistake.
Yeah. For me, I would say that one of the things I'm trying to figure out this year is an element of risk mitigation in my draft plan. So being able to balance my draft picks with upside guys and also guys that have track record and trying to play that out in some mocks and some of my drafts this season in terms of balancing the kind of what I consider to be a risk rating of certain players versus stability, and trying to balance those two. So that's something I'm looking to do.
Yeah, I like that. I'm always sort of enamored with these guys that can hit it out of the ballpark, and I get too many of those guys on my team, maybe too many rookies. So I like minimizing risk. The first thing you guys said, talking about streaming. Do you find this a viable option for, you said quarterback. I'm sure most people have heard it with defense, that is sort of picking up the best defense off the waiver wire and doing this week in and week out. Do you find this a viable option for other positions? Talk about streaming a little bit.
Yeah, I saw you had an interview with JJ, who is dubbed himself, or someone else, the late round quarterback, and I read his book a few years back, and the way he presented it with hardcore statistics really changed my thinking about it.
It's something you've done every year for the past 3 years.
So the past couple of years, I've started to do that, and it's worked out really, really well for me. And I'm working on an article that's going to go up on Fantasy Pros this week or next week, talking about streaming quarterbacks. So I did a bunch of research last year. So the benefit of taking that early quarterback like a Rodgers, Manning, happen to be Russell Wilson and Luck, is those guys gave you the best shot at the top 3 outlier performances of the week. Now, that wins you a week, but they're not going to do that every single week. I looked at a point difference from guys ranked 4 to 12. So you're still in a quarterback 1 area, right? The point difference, the average point difference from 4 to 12, 7 points. Okay? And you're talking about a position where most leagues, we're talking about 1 quarterback leagues. 2 quarterback is a little bit different.
Sure.
But in a 1 quarterback, a 7-point difference between 4 and 12, you can more than make that up when you lock in solid running back 1, a great wide receiver 1. Those are positions you have to fill 2 slots and not just the 1. So when you look at a matchup, you can find guys like, I don't know if you remember, Ryan Fitzpatrick threw 6 touchdowns 1 week. You can take guys who are considered garbage quarterbacks, you get them in a great matchup, and they're going to get you the numbers you need, which is about maybe.
Mettenberger had some big weeks last year.
Was a great streamer on occasion in the right situation. If your team is built with a strong foundation, all you really need from a quarterback is those mid-level quarterback 1 numbers, which are generally 250 and 2 touchdowns. If you get that from a streaming quarterback, with the running backs and wide receivers, you're good to go.
So if I hear you correct, it's almost 2 things. You're kind of doing what J.J. Dubs, the late round quarterback. So you're waiting to get a quarterback until the very end, 12th, 11th guy, maybe even later. But then realizing that it's not going to hurt you to pick up some guys off the waiver wire. You didn't spend that large of a pick. Is that basically it? You're starting with the late round QB, and then you've got your table set where you can draft guys depending on their performance for the coming week.
That's exactly right, because I'm putting such a low value into my draft. And it's not that I'm waiting till I'm picking a kicker in defense and then my quarterback. I wait as late as I can for a guy who I think has the possibility to finish in the upper echelons of quarterbacks. Like last year, I waited forever for Jay Cutler, and in some drafts it was Tony Romo. Now, Cutler, at the end of the year, it fell apart, but Cutler was great for the first half of the year. And then because you invest so low of a cost in these quarterbacks, I got no problem picking somebody up off the waiver wire who I think has a great matchup.
And you don't get stuck in that position where you feel like you have to play him every week. He's got a tough matchup, and I'm not going to drop him. Yeah, no, just
like
do what
Drew,
you need to do.
Like Drew Brees, people who drafted him got stuck into playing him, and through he had some great performances, but he had a lot of low-level ones too. Do you have anything?
No, my point was going to be that where you draft the quarterback high, you feel locked into them, you have less flexibility mentally. That emotional decision of, oh man, I can't play this guy, but that's why I think, I don't do it in every draft, but that's why I think why it gives it value.
So, are you only drafting one quarterback then, and then going to the waiver wire, within the first couple of weeks?
Yes, I almost always only draft one quarterback, and we're not saying, I'd say like, so Aaron Rodgers falls to you in the 4th or 5th round.
Sure.
Yeah, you're going to draft him. Then don't be stupid. But
he's probably not going to.
Yeah, that's the thing. He's probably not going to.
Yeah, that's one thing we've been talking about is don't have a draft plan that locks you into anything. You've got to understand that the draft is fluid and look for good deals when they come. You're looking for the best skill set when it falls to you, and you got to take it. What about other positions then? I mean, this has typically been a defensive strategy, but you're talking about quarterback. Is this a tight end strategy you can do as well? What about other positions for streaming?
Yeah, I think tight end is a position.
As long as you're not locked into one of those top three.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, don't stream against Gronk, but if once you're past those first 3 or 4 top guys, basically you are in a pool of very, very similar numbers, and you can wait and you can almost not draft a tight end until the very end of your draft. Very similar strategy. But the reason that tight ends are good to stream is because there are so many teams in the NFL that are so terrible against tight ends. And you can pick those out and play the matchup and say, oh, they're playing the Cardinals. The Cardinals give up touchdowns to tight end every single week. And it's very similar to what you do with, defenses. Last year, whoever was playing Jacksonville Jaguars, you wanted that defense. So, I think there's success in those 3 positions. You can stream Ds, you can stream tight ends, and you can stream quarterbacks. For me, I want one of the top tight ends. And if I don't get one of the top tight ends in the draft, if it doesn't flow that way, then I'm going to be streaming, as opposed to giving up a middle pick for a middle tight end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, there's an element of that, obviously, it's like wide receiver 3, but in the wide receiver and the running back position, that drop-off gets much larger between, the predictability and running back. Once you drop out of the top 20, it's just off a cliff. So being able to make those predictions, go ahead and give it a try, but I think it focuses more on those other 3.
So when you're streaming, do you kind of have to wait until the first couple weeks in the season to kind of see how it shakes out, to see, what teams do particularly bad against, let's say, tight end? And is that primarily what you're making your decision on? How do you know who to pick up off the waiver wire?
A bit of time there, for sure.
And you can also look at last year, see who was bad against the tight end, and then look, did they upgrade anywhere in that defense? Did they upgrade the linebacker core, the guy who's going to have to go man up against the tight end? If they didn't, then that's your best guess to start the year.
The difference with streaming, though, is, you're doing those things when you make your draft picks anyway, so at least in that situation, you're not just responding on past information. You're because those defensive ranks change every year. Right. We all like to use them in our rankings, but they fly all over the map. So, giving yourself flexibility at a few positions at least lets you react quicker to changing defenses, changing offensive schemes, changing personnel groupings, those things. So.
One thing we kind of touched on was, not locking into a strategy, trying to identify draft day value. One of the things I've been kind of looking at that I think is going to provide some of that draft day value are guys that have been under the radar in the news. They haven't necessarily changed positions, but somehow even though they haven't changed teams, I should say, the role on the team they're on has changed somehow. So let me give you a couple of examples. Like, I've got a high end, a middle end, and then a low end. Like Des Bryant. Do you think he's going to have a shot at repeating touchdowns? Because DeMarco Murray, I think he had 13, Des had 16. DeMarco Murray is now gone. So Des, he hasn't really been in the news. People on his team have left. Also, things like Andre Johnson is gone, so now DeAndre Hopkins. Even further down the line, Theo Riddick after Reggie Bush leaves. What do you think about some of these guys? Are they going to provide draft day value?
Yeah, those are the type of happenings that you are looking at, I think, the most, because a lot of times when players switch teams, they get the more news and the less historical success. You don't see running backs changing teams very often and going up to huge success, but what you do see is opportunities and roles that open up for you, whether it's Carlos Hyde or DeAndre Hopkins.
Randall Cobb a couple years ago.
Yeah, and so then you look for those things first, and once you identify them, right, Carlos Hyde and DeAndre Hopkins, their roles have opened up by players leaving. Well, now you have to research those players and say, do I believe they can go up? Like, for instance, with DeAndre Hopkins, at first I was thinking he's not capable of being a wide receiver one, and he might be hurt a little bit by Andre Johnson leaving. But, go back, look at some tape, look at the numbers, and he can clearly be a wide receiver number one. So then you target him for a huge increase. Those are things, that's where you find a lot of your fantasy gold, I think, even more so than rookies, is positions opening up.
And I think the three guys that you mentioned specifically are all potentially good values. Des is in all of our top fives right now in early season rankings. He's a touchdown monster. I don't see, some people might shy away from that, the idea that they won't stay in the running game and give him, bigger numbers. I think it stays about the same.
Yeah, with Des Bryant, he's not reliant on, he can hit that long touchdown, but there's so many times they'll be on the 2-yard line and they run a quick slant out and they throw a Des Bryant, and it's a high success rate catch. So you don't have to worry about him only getting 10-yard plus touchdowns.
Just worry about the tape.
Yeah, yeah. Look at his numbers. He's over 10 every year. That's what he does. And so just to touch on Theo Riddick, taking over for Bush, Riddick does provide an interesting value, especially he's going to go, or should go, late. And Bush did have some success up there. The offensive system is different, but me personally, I'm not a huge Joyke Bell guy. So that would lead me to take a risk on Theo Riddick later in the draft. However, they're a team that's probably going to add somebody, if a free agent or a draft pick. But if they don't do that, then I'm going to look at Theo Riddick, especially PPR.
Yeah, I just did our sleeper write-up on Theo Riddick, so I would direct any listeners to check out, our sleepers and all the stuff we're putting in our draft kit. But he is one guy I'm high on, and also I got into a Twitter spat a little bit with Mike Clay, and something we're going to talk about a little bit later, regression in players, and he was saying that there's no way Des Bryant can continue. Now, my point was that there's a hole to fill. DeMarco Murray had 13 touchdowns. Now he's gone. Des Bryant, every year for the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, I forget, his touchdowns have increased. And Clay was all about this isn't going to happen. He's gonna fall. But I think you guys predicted him roughly at about 13 touchdowns. And I know we're going to get into TD dependence and regression, but he is, I'm hearing you say, one of your top wide receivers. Do you think he has a chance at repeating 16 touchdowns?
Yeah, I don't expect him to get 16. I think that number's an outlier, a touchdown a game. But yeah, the last 3 years running, he's been like 12, 13, 16. There's no reason to think he can't get 12 or 13 touchdowns with Marco Murray gone. So and really with the Marco Murray gone, he's going to probably up his yards. His efficiency last year was far better than it has ever been before. So there's actual areas on his statistics that aren't touchdowns that just logically, statistically, should actually improve. So even with a small regression in touchdowns, I think he could finish number 1. But I've got him, I think, number 5.
Yeah, he's a high quality wide receiver 1. I have not seen anything, nor was there a tape scene that people were talking about. Was not seen that would lead us to believe that he can't produce the same similar numbers and be a top 5 guy.
Yeah, I agree.
When I was doing my homework on you guys, listening to some podcasts, you had a great conversation talking about, just the old saying, behind every good man stands a good broad, somewhere along the way. And kind of the idea that behind every good running game, there's a solid center, which I think a lot of people really tend to overlook. I just tweeted out a couple of weeks ago, for example, Unger, when he was starting with Lynch, it was about an 8.5 fantasy difference points for Lynch. When Unger was there, Lynch averaged 22 points a game. Without him, he was 13.33. So talk a little bit about centers and the impact they have on the running game, maybe even how Unger is going to impact, I would say more so Ingram, but even Spiller down in New Orleans.
So,
yeah, I'll let you take most of this, but last year I was that guy who had been Tate in the beginning of the year, and we saw Cleveland's running game was producing at a really high clip. I think it was
Mac.
145 yards a game type of numbers, and that dropped down significantly to below 100 yards. Tate fell off the map because Mac went out.
Yep.
You just saw the entire crumbling of that offensive line. The stability of that line changed, and Mike has some other examples, I think, that we've shared.
To go with your Max Unger, Marshawn Lynch averaged 5 yards a carry with Max Unger under center. It dropped down to 4, an entire yard per carry. I mean, that's substantial stuff. And I'll give you a few names of, these are the top-rated centers by Pro Football Focus, and see if you can see what runs along the line. Nick Mangold with the Jets, Travis Frederick with Dallas, Rodney Hudson with Kansas City, Max Unger, Seattle, Corey Linsley, Green Bay, and Marquise Pouncey, Pittsburgh. And what's the common thread between those teams? Fantastic running games. I mean, it's not just guard dependent. You have to have a good center calling out protections, calling out what's the blocking scheme going to be. These guys are crucial to running games, which and leads to fantasy production.
Yeah, that's what I think a lot of people don't realize. I mean, I look at Pro Football Focus, they rate guards and tackles and everything, but center is by far the most important position. They're the quarterback of the offensive lineman. They're calling out what they see. They are letting the other guys know where they should go, getting them into position. They are so vitally important. And like you said, that top list there for Pro Football Focus, there's a huge theme there. And I think identifying a good running back starts with looking at the center. So speaking of Alex Mack, what do you think for next year? Crowell, West, a bit of both? What do you think?
I'm a West guy. I think, Crowell's a guy who can't burst on the scene, but there were some warning signs for me in terms of not being able to necessarily take the reins completely, and their confidence levels with Crowell seem to vary throughout the year. I think that the pick investment in West and the way they threw West back out there even after being in the doghouse leads me to believe this is West's backfield to take if he can. It's tough to lock him in now. I want to see camp. I want to see preseason, but I'm a West guy on that front.
Yeah, I agree with Andy. It's right now it's a gut call because when you look at their numbers, they're nearly identical. But to echo, it's the fact that Crowell was given the chance to take the job. And
passing game too. Passing game for West seems. I mean, West is more capable there in my opinion. So.
Yeah, and for
they'll
regression,
both be used.
For regression, Crowell's touchdown rate, that I don't think he can sustain what he did last year without getting more volume, of course.
Yeah, there's a bunch of unproven backs out there, and boy, fantasy owners are going to be salivating like Pavlov's dog to get some of these guys. Hyde, Murray, Mason, Crowell, West. But let's start with C.J. Anderson. This is kind of always a favorite one to argue, I think. Personally, I am pro CJ all the way. Let me give you some numbers here, and you can give me the anti-argument. But his first game in which he really was given the bulk of the carries was week 10. He was given double-digit carries. So I looked at from that point forward, he averaged 4.8 yards per carry. Out of guys that had 100 carries or more from that time, he was 8th best, 4.8. Same time frame. Pro Football Focus rated him as the 3rd most elusive back. Same time frame, week 10. Again, when he was given double-digit carries going forward, pretty much. He ranked 4th for yards after contact, 406. He ranked 2nd with Mr. Broken Tackles with 41. So I am all about C.J. Anderson this year. We got one of my brethren over at Pyro Dog. He is not as big of an Anderson guy. Why shouldn't I be looking to take C.J. Anderson this year?
Well, before Andy answers that question, let me just preface that and say, Mo, you are correct, and you should take C.J. Anderson. But I'll let Andy, because we've debated this, as you've heard.
This is one of our fantasy face-offs that we had on the show. It was a good listen. I want to preface my take by saying I don't think C.J. Anderson, the talent, is absent. I think he is the most talented back in the Denver backfield. I think some of those numbers are probably unsustainable if you did give him the volume. But my concerns have to do with what type of risk do I want to take with a first-round draft pick. Last year was a year where we gave the keys to the fantasy Lamborghini to Monte Ball, and
didn't work.
It didn't work. And I'm not saying he's Monte Ball. I hate Monte Ball. You can look up last season. I hated Monte Ball before the season. He's got no elite skills. I think C.J. Anderson is the best back in that backfield, but I don't think he's going to be handed that job outright. I think you saw him take advantage of an injury situation last year. And from what I've heard from Kubiak in the last couple of years, he is, Kubes, as we call him on the show, he's more prone to realizing the need for that sharing the load a little bit. And I just think you're just going to end up with a situation. Juwan Thompson went out and averaged 5 a carry last year. Hillman was good when he wasn't injured. Monte Ball's come in saying he wants to take the role back. I don't think he can, but I'm just worried about investing that high of a draft pick on a guy with some question marks, with a limited track record for the season. It's going to come down to pass protection. It's going to come down to some different things. He doesn't have the benefit of being a top pick or a high investment monetarily. I think he's making nothing this year. So it's more of a question mark thing. I like him. I think he's good. I just think that you run a risk with him than you do some other guys. So he's down at he's my number 8, 9, 10 back instead of kind of where some other guys have him. So that's my concerns.
And then speaking of the importance of center, I don't know if you guys saw this when it came through, but the Roto World had a blip of that the Broncos acquired Geno Gradkowski from the Ravens. He was in 2013. He started all 16 games. Was Pro Football Focus's worst center.
Yeah.
And he played 10 snaps. And if you remember the Ravens run game in 2013, things were not going so well before Forsett took over. So he got traded over, and Roto World has him as a leader in the clubhouse to take the Broncos starting center job. So that is a red flag for me. If he gets the job, if they don't upgrade there.
Yeah, I'll admit, if Anderson gets volume, how does he not produce? Everybody's that's ever been Peyton Manning's quarterback and a Kubiak running back is going to produce. So it's just me betting on volume and betting on some mix-up on that backfield.
Well, let's switch to some other guys. Carlos Hyde. I've heard a ton of commentary on this guy. I'm not as big on Hyde. I know he's got I talked about he has not been in the news. His position has changed since Frank Gore has left town. But boy, there was 8 games last year in which he carried the rock at least 5 times. So only half the season he got 5 carries, and his yards per carry, he only went over 4 yards per carry 3 times in those 8 games. So I'm not a big Carlos Hyde guy. What do you guys think of him?
Me, I'm not a big Carlos Hyde guy either. Especially, when you bring Bush in, I think Bush is going to be undervalued in this draft.
Agreed.
I think the veteran presence of Reggie Bush means something to that team, and so I think I got to see it first.
Yeah, at first I didn't really mind that signing for Carlos Hyde's value, but the one thing it shows is that Carlos Hyde isn't going to be catching the ball. And for me, just like philosophically, I want a running back who is able to catch the ball, who is, I don't want to have a running back where their team has to be in the lead in that specific week to be on the field. And if it turns out that the Niners are down and they're using Reggie Bush as their pass catching back and he's on the field, I just don't like it. So there's definitely ways.
Caps the upside a little bit.
And if you look at where Carlos Hyde's being drafted, he's being drafted as a guarantee to produce on the touches that Frank Gore's leaving. And so risk mitigation, I would love for the guy right in front of me to take Carlos Hyde.
Yeah. The San Francisco defense is getting worse. They lost a Hall of Fame linebacker. The rookie, I can't remember his name, left because of concussion concerns. When the defense is bad, the running game has to go away. I agree with Reggie Bush is going to be catching the ball. And they lost Mike Upati to our team, the Cardinals. And Mike Upati's been one of the best run-blocking guards in the league for years when Frank Gore was having his success. So that you can't discount all of those things. And
I think we're on board with you on fading on him a little bit.
yeah, and we're still stinging from a Beanie Wells draft from the same school. So.
Well, since you guys are Arizona guys, what about the Duke, Ellington? Loved him 2 years ago, drafted him, and yards per carry fell. Is it just that he can't take that main load? If he is sort of a complementary back, he's still good. What do you think about Ellington?
Sell the stock.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great offensive weapon, but you don't get points for just being flexible in an offense in fantasy. I think he's great for the Arizona Cardinals. I just think they know he can't carry the load, and
the Cardinals will be drafting somebody very high, I think.
Andre Ellington is Gio Bernard. That's who.
Yeah.
If he's in that role, he will succeed, and he'll still have some fantasy value, but he just is. He doesn't have the ability or the size to.
Those yards per carry numbers were bad.
Yeah, last year was just, and he wasn't even elusive last year. I mean, he was dealing with some weird foot problems and some other injuries and a sports hernia, but the Cardinals are going to add somebody.
It's also worth noting right now that he's not healthy right now. Like today, he's not participating in some of the things they want him participating in. So that's just a little bit scary, and all the more reason for them to spend a high draft pick on a running back, which I expect them to do.
Yeah, his yards per carry fall was incredible. I mean, I'm not Rain Man like my boy Dog, who just has an unbelievable ability to remember facts and data, but I think he was 5.7 2 years ago, was one of the highest yards per carry, and then last year he just fell off a cliff. It was just huge. So I agree, he needs a Jeremy Hill out there in that offense.
Yeah, they do. They need a Jeremy Hill.
What about
Peterson?
Yeah, I like Peterson in that role too. He looks good in the uniform.
Yeah, we retweeted. You guys had someone doctored up the picture?
Yeah.
That looked good, man.
Yeah, I saw that. What about two other boys? Latavius Murray, Trey Mason, both of which don't have very great centers. In fact, I just looked on Pro Football Focus. Trey Mason, the highest ranked center there was Scott Wells, is 37th for run blocking.
Yeah, they just got somebody new. I can't recall his name. But I was not on the Zach Stacy bandwagon like a lot of people were. He was a mystery especially with his touchdowns that he was just managing to pull out. I think Trey Mason's a little bit better, not a little. He's a better talent than Zach Stacy, but for him to be a running back too, it's completely volume dependent, and I don't know if Jeff Fisher's really willing to give Trey Mason the volume that it would take for guys like us to get a good fantasy back, or score enough points.
And he's in the NFC West, so
yeah, he's got some tough games.
Yeah. So we talked about guys that their role has changed, but they've stayed on the same team. What about guys that have found themselves in some new digs? Frank Gore with the Colts. What round is he no longer of value? Do you like him with the Colts? Even Andre Johnson. They've got a couple new offensive weapons. What do you think about the Colts and Johnson and Gore?
I'd love to speak to that. I'm a big believer of Frank Gore. I think his body type, his attitude, his work ethic, his showing last year, even as the season was ending, show that he's got juice still. There's no drop off from a talent or an age or a mileage perspective for me. I think he's going to a team where they want him to be used as a 3-down back on a high power offense, and so I can see him I
He's
see
just
him.
outside your top 10.
Yeah, he's my
11 or 12, I think.
yeah. So I can see him pretty much. I'm like writing him in a permanent marker as a running back too. I see him with a very 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 high floor because he will have volume. There will be touchdowns in the offense, and he's going to catch passes, put that back into his repertoire. So as far as where you value him in the draft, I would love to get Frank Gore in the third and behind. Right now, I looked at some mocks, and that's pretty much where he's going is mid to late third, and so I expect him to be on my teams because I like him there. I think that if you draft him as a second running back, you're golden, and so it's just a matter of where you're going to do that. But I was hoping his value stayed a little lower than that because if you can grab him in the fourth, that's great.
Yeah, and just speaking to Andre Johnson, I think you said you heard it in the show. I'm huge on Andre this year. He's probably a guy that's going to be on tons of my teams. He's getting ranked kind of on the edge of wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 bill for some reason. And to me, I don't see a depreciation on his talent levels. We talked a little bit on the show about the fact that his targets were up, but the quarterback play last year was so poor that he didn't have a high amount of drops, but he had a low catch percentage because the targets were off target, and he still put up a pretty good year. I think he comes in at, 31, 32?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Reggie Wayne came into that offense with luck 2 years ago in that exact type of role, put up 1,300 yards, had a monster season, and I just think he's another high floor guy. He's a wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside. I think he's my 10 or 11 on my board, so I might be one of the more bold, higher guys on him, but I love Andre Johnson in that offense. I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't. I don't think Hilton's great, but I think your value's there with Johnson.
I'm kind of in the middle actually with both of these guys where I like Gore, but I like him more in the back of the fourth, fifth round as a middle level RB2, maybe closer to lower level, and Andre Johnson the same thing, low level wide receiver 2, maybe high level wide receiver 3. The way I saw his numbers, I'm not completely sold on it at this point.
What about some new faces on the Eagles? Not even touching on Bradford. There's been some crazy reports in the news about him being used as a chip, even though Chip said he wasn't. But what about DeMarco Murray? Impact on Sproles, impact on Matthews. Do you like Murray going to the Eagles?
Yeah, I think we all, or at least for me, I project his yards per carry higher than anybody I have in football. Obviously, I think his volume is going to go down a little bit. We had an interview with Andrew Goldwasser. He writes for the Eagles on NFL Spin Zone. He kind of had the carries breaking down in like 55, I think it was 35-10 breakdown, and I think that's about where I see it too. I think Murray will be very, very efficient in that role. I just think you can't put him in the same category as he was last year, just from volume and how that offense will mix up. So
For where he's
No,
being drafted, I think he's being drafted too high given the volume he's going to get, personally. I do agree he's going to be fantastic for touch, and he'll be a serviceable running back. I think he also, having that load be shared, he'll play 16 games, and so he'll help your fantasy team, but I just don't like where you're having to draft him because it only takes one person, in each league to overdraft a guy, and I think that
he won't be on a lot of your teams.
he won't be on many of my teams.
Where are you taking Ryan Matthews?
I
That's
love
a
Ryan.
good question.
Yeah, I've always been a huge Ryan Matthews supporter. I think his talent is overlooked because
his collarbone is overbroken.
Yeah, well said.
He's made of glass, and I concede that point. However, when he's on the field, and people freaked out when he lost his third down role, but for a guy who was just a 1-2 thumper, he was one of the best in the league when you break down his stats. So him going to that high-powered Eagles offense, and he fits the mold of what Chip Kelly wants. I love him, especially for that backup range. And not only can I think he has value on his own when Murray is playing, if Murray goes out, which he also has a tendency to do, you have an RB1 right away. You're not talking about a handcuff who's maybe he can be like Alfred Blue, where, yeah, he's got the opportunity and the volume, but is he really that good? Ryan Matthews in the Eagles offense
It's top 5.
You're gonna win matchups. You might win a league with Ryan Matthews this year.
Yeah, when you called him Glass, it reminded me of the guy from Mike Tyson's Punch Out. I think for Glass Joe,
That's Joe, yeah.
first contender. What about another guy that's loved, hated, Brandon Marshall? How do you like him with the Jets? Personally, I really like Decker as a number 2 guy, but how do you like Marshall and what the Jets have going?
Mike, this might be you.
Well, that's Decker. I'm also infatuated with what Decker can do, but Marshall can put up numbers with average quarterback play. To me, the only thing that can stop Brandon Marshall from finishing top 15, top 20 is Brandon Marshall. Is he mentally prepared for leaving his good friend in Cutler with a great system and going to the scrutiny that is the New York Jets? I mean, you can't underestimate the outside pressure that New York players have to deal with tabloids and people calling you a bum.
You won't have to drive as far for inside the NFL now, though.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I'm not too high on Brandon Marshall. I've kind of soured on him a little bit.
I still like him.
He's still the one to me, but yeah, I think we all like his impact on Decker more. That offense is getting better, and
for where you're drafting each guy and where I expect both of them to finish, that the value I see in Decker, and I don't see the value.
He has a good impact on Decker, and he has a good impact on Alshon Jeffrey. Where Jeffrey gets to come into that locked and loaded, smoking Jay Cuddy, number 1 target role, and
what people are for Decker. Decker finished 28th last year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they think, oh, he was terrible because he wasn't putting up Peyton Manning stats, but high-level wide receiver 3 for where, and he was injured
half the year.
He was injured, and he's really more a number 2.
Yeah.
I mean, he has a great number 1 guy, and maybe he plays the full season, but he's going to go really, really late in the draft. People are going to overlook him, and I think he's tremendous value this year.
Yeah, with Marshall there, Decker's not going to see the same defensive attention he was seeing last year. I think that's great for him. Real quick, what about Alshon, where the vacancy left by Marshall? Do you like it? I love Alshon, and I think he can do it when there's a big guy there, when Marshall's gone, with Cutler throwing him the ball, with Clausen throwing him the ball. I'm all about Alshon, but what do you guys think?
He's our consensus number 8, I believe, at the wide receiver position. He's got all the upside in the world.
Yeah, I think he might even. No, yeah, I think that's about right.
I have him very high this year because Jay Cutler is a 1-target guy.
Yeah.
If you look at the target breakdown of Brandon Marshall, it's constantly over 150 targets, and Jeffrey has the ability. You saw when in the games where Marshall was out, Jeffrey didn't melt under the
Crash
pressure.
and burn. Yeah.
He stepped up. He became a beast, and so him taking over that number 1 position, he's gonna get fed the targets. I guess these guys are a little higher on Martellus Bennett than I am. Well, okay, maybe just Andy.
Yeah, I am.
But I don't see any way Jeffrey sees less than 130 targets this year.
Oh, yeah. He's going to get the targets, and it's exactly what we were talking about early in the show when you say, okay, the opportunity arises for a player, then you have to look into the player and say, can he do it? He's already proven that he can do it, so you've got a number 1 wide receiver there for sure, barring injury. And you spoke to this a second ago, but if Jay Cutler, goes to the bench, which I can see happening just from a publicity and fan rage standpoint, when Josh McCown came in, Alshon Jeffrey was just a monster. So, yeah, I love Alshon Jeffrey. Definite wide receiver number 1, high end.
Yeah. Well, speaking of guys in new situations, new uniforms, got to ask, one of the larger splashes of free agency was probably Jimmy Graham going to the Seahawks. What's the impact on Graham's numbers? What's the impact on Russell Wilson's numbers?
We just talked about this.
Yeah, definitely. Your listeners can download the show we released this morning. We did tight ends all the way through, but Mike can drop you some good information about what to expect from Jimmy Graham.
Me and Mike can find on that.
Yeah, you can go first. I'll give my numbers.
I believe that Jimmy Graham will have a very good year. I think his numbers might his numbers will come down from where he plays 16 games. But there's reasons to really like what you see in Jimmy Graham. One is the rollout offense of Russell Wilson. You're going to have a lot of broken plays, so I think the yards per catch are going to go up for him. I think they're going to use him as a red zone target. He's still going to have double-digit touchdowns. And you just look at the fact that for the last 2 years, Seattle has been trying to get an offensive weapon tight end, a pass-catching tight end, and what they gave up for him. I think that Pete Carroll has an idea of exactly how they want to use him. And so I think he's good. That being said, for where you're going to draft him and the value he's going to give, like I think that Jimmy Graham's going to be, I think he finishes as the tight end number 2. That's where I've got him. But you're going to have to draft him so high, and I don't know that he's a great value for where you're getting him, because whenever you get a tight end, you're giving up another position early. So I would prefer taking Kelsey in the 4th, but
the problem with Jimmy Graham for me is volume. He's averaged 137 targets in his career. He's going to a team where the number 1 option in Seattle hasn't received over 100 targets. Drew Brees averages, in the last 4 years, 660 attempts over the course of a year. Russell Wilson just had his highest year with 452. You're going from one of the most pass-happy teams in the league to the lowest possible passing percentage in the NFL. And we all saw the debacle at the end of the Super Bowl, and which leads me to the next point. To fix that, they gave Marshawn Lynch $12 million this year. That's what he's going to make. And Lynch averages almost 300 carries in the last 4 years. The volume won't be there. Perhaps Jimmy Graham's probably the new top target for the Seattle Seahawks, but his draft day value compared to what he's going to produce it just can't possibly jive without that volume.
Yeah, and if you listen to our episode from today, you'll hear us talk a lot about Kelsey, and Mike and I have Kelsey ahead of Graham. Jason has Graham ahead of Kelsey. So should be interesting.
All right, so let me ask you this then: if Kelsey or Graham were still on the board, are you going to take a tight end, or let's say the best running back would be Latavius Murray?
Oh, that's a tough one.
If I'm at a place where I'm choosing between the best running back on the board is Latavius Murray, if Jimmy Graham's still on the board,
Yeah.
I'm taking Jimmy Graham at that point.
Trey Mason,
Jimmy Graham.
Joique Bell,
Jimmy Graham.
Ingram.
Just if I can get Kelsey around later, absolutely.
And that's not saying I'm super high on Ingram. That's just under in that offense, and what they seem to be doing down in New Orleans is trying to switch their team to a running team, or at least balance it out a little bit more. So I'm going to take the chance with Ingram.
You're going to pay a lot for Jimmy's name.
And stats-wise, I expect Kelsey and Jimmy Graham to end up very similar to each other. 2, 3, respectively. So if I can get a better running back than Kelsey later.
All right, what about wide receivers? Let's say there's Kelsey / Graham on the board, or Victor Cruz.
Give me the tight ends.
I don't believe in Cruz at all.
Cruz with that patella tendon injury, I have no idea if he's even going to be back. We dealt with that in Arizona, where we spent a second-round pick on Ryan Williams, who was supposed to be just a sensational running back, tore his patella tendon right away and was never the same and has never been the same.
Golden Tate.
I like Golden Tate, but I don't know what round we're talking about, but I would still take Jimmy Graham over Tate.
Brandon Cooks.
I'd still take the tight end, I think.
Yeah, and we just did a wide receiver show, and I thought it was going to be a lot higher on Brandon Cooks than it really fell out.
T.Y. Hilton.
Hilton. I love Hilton.
Hilton. All right. So what about Emmanuel Sanders?
I love Emmanuel Sanders this year.
Yeah.
They're going to focus on two wide receiver sets. I love him.
Yeah, I'd probably go. I'm not as big of a Sanders guy as him, but I'm going to take.
Give me Kelsey. Give me Olsen. Give me one of these tight ends a little bit later on. If you're talking wide receiver 1.
Yeah, I mean, I would much rather have a T.Y. Hilton and Emmanuel Sanders paired with Greg Olsen than Jimmy Graham paired with,
Macklin.
Jeremy Macklin. Yeah.
All right. We talked a little bit earlier, streaming quarterback. Are you going to draft a tight end before you draft a quarterback?
I'm hoping to, because I'm a huge supporter in Kelsey. I mean, we break that down at length in the show, but I'm willing to pay. And I'm not usually a draft a tight end high kind of guy, but if I can get Kelsey in the 5th every single time, in the 4th, I'm probably still going to take him. So that's going to be before my quarterback.
Yeah.
All right.
That's sad.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'd love to pick up a Kelsey.
However, if let's say Kelsey gets snatched up before me, then I'll see how the draft flows. But who knows then at that point? Because after my top tier tight ends, it's just
all the same.
Whatever.
Well, let's talk about that then. If we've got Gronk clearly number 1, and then arguably Graham, Kelsey 2 and 3, does it matter after that point? I mean, positional differential, we're not talking that much probably between number 4 and number 12. Who are some guys that you like after those top 3?
Yeah, I would say, Olsen and Bennett are the 2 that might fit into their own little tier somewhere in the middle of the draft. Other than that, I'm letting myself find I'm streaming. I'm finding somebody late in the draft and I'm taking a shot on whatever it might be, a Clay, a Cameron, a Dwayne Allen, a Kobe Fleener, a Zach Ertz. Who cares?
Yeah,
Julius Thomas. If I can get Julius Thomas, I'm pretty high on him. Not Denver high, but high enough. So.
Yeah, I think the point differential past those 3 guys between even I agree that Olsen and Bennett are going to be in their own little middle tier, but the point differential between them and the next tier is just nonsense to me for avoiding high upside wide receivers and running backs that I could be drafting. So I'm going, if I don't get one of those top 3 guys, I'm drafting the last guy that I like, which would probably be Jason Witten. I think you could get him on the waiver in some drafts, which is ridiculous. Most leagues you're having like 15 tight ends drafted off the board, and I think that there's some people draft 2, which is ridiculous. Yeah, I've seen plenty of teams draft 2 tight ends, but I think there's more than 12 tight ends that are equally, the point differential is not going to be that big a deal. So I'd wait until the very end.
I'll put it this way: let's say that Antonio Gates, Jason Witten, or I'll just use those 2 because they're probably going to go later. Let's say they're on the board in the 8th, and then 2 of my later round QBs who I'm targeting, like Eli Manning or Carson Palmer, if they're both still on the board, I might take a tight end there because I really like Jason Witten this year, and people are going to overlook Antonio Gates again.
Yeah, I'm with you in holding off tight ends. I think the positional differential just really isn't worth it. But once again, drafting is a fluid beast. You got to be ready to react. We were just doing a 10-team mock, and although I wasn't really looking for him, Julius Thomas fell to me in the 10th round. Now, it's only a 10-man league, but 10th round, I couldn't pass up the value, and I took him.
Yeah. One thing I'll say, too, that I've had success with is it seems like you see a lot in preseason. Gronkowski before he broke out, if you watch that preseason, Julius Thomas before he broke out, you watch that preseason. Both of those guys were guys I drafted in the 7th and 8th rounds based on seeing how teams were utilizing them in the preseason. So look for that outlier performance and, maybe put a little stock into it if you're going to grab a sleeper tight end in the 10th, 11th round.
Yeah, I think it's the one position you can actually be a little bit more reliable on preseason performance.
And Kelsey was the exact same thing this past preseason. People didn't account for the Chiefs kind of babying his injury and easing him in. Whereas if he had gone full force like he did for the second half of the season, he would have been a top 3 guy.
Yeah, and it just pretty much recently came out that he was injured and they were kind of holding him back much more so than they had planned.
Yes.
Recently, you guys discussed Mike Evans and the likelihood that he regresses. At Pyromaniac, we've got a really cool chart. I think it's just invaluable. It's a touchdown dependency. So basically, it breaks down a player's total points and then gives it percentages. So how much came from touchdowns, how much came from yardage. Now, out of the top 30 wide receivers, the most touchdown dependent was top 5: Torrey Smith, Des Bryant, Mike Wallace, Mike Evans, Randall Cobb. So, for example, Torrey Smith had 46.3% of his points come from touchdowns. And Mike Evans, your guy who you said is going to regress, he had 40 points come from touchdowns. Talk a little bit about his future and the likelihood he's going to regress.
Well, you kind of cut out there for a little, so hopefully you'll stay with us. But yeah, I think the question marks around Mike Evans are pretty significant. I mean, he was super touchdown dependent. He only had 60. He was in the 60s, 68 receptions. And you also saw a year in which Vincent Jackson had an outlier touchdown performance, despite getting more targets than Mike Evans. And so I think that's where you look at a rookie quarterback, most likely, right? We all agree is coming in there to an offense with Lovie Smith that I think will keep him. He's not going to be slinging the rock. He's not going to be Glennon out there. They're going to let him take his shots, but he's going to be developed. And so when you're developing a rookie QB, I think the question marks around Evans are going to outweigh his draft position for me on the board. Jason here, he's really high on Vincent Jackson as a bounce back candidate because of some of those numbers. And so I'd rather, I think right now the ADPs of those guys are, Evans is back out of the second, beginning of the third, where Vincent Jackson's is 7th and 8th round. I mean, that's a no-brainer to me. I mean, regression candidate, Evans is 6'5". We just talked about Des Bryant. I think he's going to get his in terms of touchdowns, but I don't know if it's going to be 12 again. And I think Vincent's going to take some of those. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I think his yardage. I think the touchdowns should regress just because you have a rookie quarterback. But there's no reason to think that the yardage will go down. I mean, you need to look at, you want some consistency from your receivers, right? But you have Mike Evans had a 3-game burst of where he averaged 150 yards with multi-touchdowns for 3 weeks in a row. And that's with Mike Glennon. Then he got pulled, and that's when Evans kind of trailed off, where he was ascending because Lovie Smith thought Josh McCown was a good quarterback. And bringing in Jameis Winston, who has a big arm and is accurate, that jives completely with who Mike Evans is. So he might get drafted really early because I think people are talking like 3rd round for Mike Evans, that's too high for me. Yeah, that's too high for my taste. But I don't think the touchdowns will go down, but I think the yardage goes up.
He's good. I mean, he's a good player.
Well, I'm with you on Vincent Jackson. Last year was kind of an outlier for his touchdowns. But talk to me a little bit about why you think, particularly with Jameis Winston, a rookie quarterback, why might he be looking more towards Vincent Jackson than a Mike Evans?
Yeah, we covered this in one of our podcasts. I went back historically looking at the rookie quarterbacks coming in, and good rookie quarterbacks coming in with a stud veteran and a stud young wide receiver on their team, and all the targets. I mean, the targets were heavily on the veteran wide receiver. You've got Andrew Luck really going to Reggie Wayne as his outlet, as his safety valve, as his everything. When Aaron Rodgers took over, even though Jordan Nelson was on the team, it was still the old guys, Donald Driver. It was the veterans that he really went to. Same with Roddy White and Matt Ryan. And so I think that when he comes in, he's going to be looking for Vincent Jackson. So if this is a dynasty league, then sure, I would say Mike Evans, or even a keeper league, Mike Evans has a lot of value there because they're going to build a rapport, and he's going to be amazing over this next decade. But I think this year, Vincent Jackson, because a rookie comes in and normally targets their veteran when there's a good veteran there, he's going to have the bulk of the looks, both in and out of the red zone.
We got about 5 minutes left here, boys. Give me a list, a couple of guys that you think are the greatest bust potentials for 2015.
C.J. Anderson.
Kelvin Benjamin.
Yeah, we are. Well, especially, I'm not a believer in what Kelvin Benjamin did. With you talk about regression, and I'm not a big Cam Newton guy, and just the catch percentage of Kelvin combined with his average yards of reception, and just not being able to do anything after the catch, dropping touchdowns. He's going to be overdrafted because of where he finished last year.
I think industry-wise, we're probably our group here is the lowest on Matt Forte. Losing Trestman being 100+ catch guy last year, but only averaging 3.8 a carry. So pure bust, probably not, but definitely not one of our top guys. Forte's a name I would think about.
You guys are in Chicago, is that right? Or
Mainly based out of Chicago. I'm in Michigan. We got a few guys spread out here and there, but our podcast comes out of Chicago.
Gotcha. So, how do you feel on Forte? Just curious from the insider.
Well, I'm a Michigan guy, so I'm certainly, Riddick is kind of my guy, but I think Forte, I don't think he's going to perform where he's going to be drafted. So I don't think he's going to find value. I don't think you're going to find value there. I think you're going to pay too much for him to get what he puts out.
Yeah. Crowell,
what about
we talked about him earlier too.
Who'd you say?
Isaiah Crowell could be a guy that's overdrafted in our opinion.
Is there anybody that is going to have the fantasy swine flu for you? Just somebody that you will, even though he may not bust, but somebody you just don't like, somebody that will not be on your team.
Other than those guys we just mentioned, I mean, a player like Torrey Smith, a boom bust guy, will never be on my team. That would be one I would avoid like the plague.
Yeah. I don't like caps. I don't like those guys that are just they're locked in and capped. I don't know how many teams Jonathan Stewart's going to be on for me.
He's going to be on my team.
Trying to think of some other ones. Ellington's a guy that has a lot of question marks. He's probably not going to be on any of my boards, which pains me as a Cardinal fan. Evans was when we did our wide receiver show, Evans was my regression candidate, so he's another guy that we just talked about. Who else are you not touching?
We just talked about Carlos Hyde. I don't think he's going to be on any of my teams.
Yeah.
Unless something shakes up. But
what about going the other way? Give me a handful of sleepers or even deep sleepers, guys you're keeping an eye on.
So the guys I really like, who I think are going to go late, Roddy White, I think has the potential for a big bounce back. I'm going to mention the name, so don't freak out. But Michael Floyd is a guy that people are going to be furious with. They're going to completely dismiss him. But I think Michael Floyd's poor play was completely connected to Arizona's poor quarterback performance. And when I say that, I think mentally he wasn't prepared for that, and he had kind of checked out. And so if we can get Carson Palmer back and to play a full season, which he tore his ACL, but Floyd is going to go late, and I think he has a chance to bounce back to be where people thought he was going to be last year.
Yeah, and I like both of the receivers in Philadelphia. I think Jordan Matthews is going to be incredible, but as a deeper sleeper, Josh Huff seems like somebody that is flying under the radar right now and has the opportunity to produce at a high level. It's rare that you get to, unless it's a rookie, that you get to pick a guy with just a really late pick where guys might not even know his name, and he can, produce in a way that you can't get him out of your roster.
Yeah.
And I'd say just keep an eye on Tampa Bay's running back situation, how it shakes out in the preseason. Is Charles Sims a value there with what they want to do? I mean, that's another guy that I want to pay attention to.
Very good. You guys dropped some fantasy goo. We went a little over an hour, but we're always a little long-winded at Pyro. But really want to thank you guys. You guys are fantastic. Once again, at the FF Ballers on Twitter. Any last thoughts or anything you wanted to say to the Pyro audience while you've got us?
Well, just thank you very much for the
opportunity.
opportunity.
Thanks for having us on, and check out all our stuff at fantasyfootballers.com. We love doing these. We love sharing that knowledge with our brothers there in the industry, so we appreciate it.
Yeah, if you want to find us, easiest way, you're on iTunes, just search for Fantasy Football. We're ranked number 2 right now behind ESPN, so it'd be easy to find.
Braggers.
You gave us the opportunity.
All right. Really appreciate it, guys. Maybe we can check in, after some stuff changes after the draft as it gets closer to kickoff time. Once again, this is PyromaniacMo, PYROMANIAC Mo, and as always, tune into the boys every week at Pyromaniac. We're going to have our draft kit coming out soon. We're going to be launching the Pyro Pro, so a lot of interesting, cool things in the works. You can follow us on our main site for Twitter is PYROMAN, the number 1AC. Until the next time, keep up the fantasy goo, and we will talk to you later.